W- Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And as of course, on Sunday mornings
Amen.
thank you. And on Sunday mornings we actually do Genesis, just continuing Kiseder with Genesis. So I'm going to start the screen share. And here we are. I just have to link. And here we are. So we had actually, you can see we start chapter 2. I explained this, how the chapters were actually, and the numeration of the verses, the numbering of the verses were all done by Christian monks, and we've adopted that. Interesting. So sometimes it shows interesting things. So it's interesting that this really is a continuation of chapter 1. And one of the reasons I think is just to show how distinct the Shabbat is. That's sort of an interesting thought. At any rate, Vayachal Elohim bayom hashvi'i, and I translated Vayachal as ended and not completed. And if you think about it, as we were singing Adon Olam yesterday, I was thinking of, it says Va'acharei kichlot hakol, when everything has ended. And there's the Vaychal. It's a reference, in a sense, to this, that the world, despite the fact that it may exist for billions of years, eventually it's going to come to an end. And whether we're talking about the earth or we're talking about the universe, there is that notion. So, and part of that, I think, allows us to expand our minds into the idea of how grand God is, the grandeur of the Creator. So some beautiful interpretations here. And if you're not muted, just check and make sure you're muted. And if you have a question, just raise your hand and I will try or unmute and interrupt me. But otherwise, please stay on mute. Vayachal Elohim bayom hashvi'i. So there we are, right? God ended on the seventh day. I'm going to think it's Rabbi Shimon Omer. Okay, Rabbi Shimon says, Basar Vadam, when it comes to mortal human beings, She'eno Yodea Itav Urga'av, who is not able to precisely determine the minutes and seconds, okay, the precise moment, down to the ultimate point, right? Tzarich losif mechol ala kodesh. It's required that they add from the weekday or from the profane to the sacred. In other words, that you have to start on Shabbat, you have to start and break into the weekday. That's one of the reasons why we start Shabbat before sunset, and to make sure that we are absolutely observing it on the day. But not only that, he's saying that the Hebrew text here, by saying that God ended his creation on the seventh day, has to do with how we would perceive it. V'hakadosh Baruch Hu, however, when it comes to the Holy One, blessed be He, Sheyodeh itav urgamav, who is able to precisely determine the exact moment, nichnas bo kechut hasa'ara, he enters into the Shabbat as like a hair split, right? Like a split of a hair, or like a hair. And it looks ki'ilu kala bo bayom. So it looks as if he ended it on that day itself. In other words, on the seventh day. So we don't perceive it, that we're not able to precisely determine that moment. But the text is reflecting our inability to calculate moments with complete precision. Davar acher, another interpretation, and I love this one. It's relatively well known. Ma haya ha'olam chaser. What was the world? What was the universe lacking? Menucha. menucha, rest, refreshment, right? The chance to pause, but rest essentially. Bat Shabbat came, bat menucha, rest also came. Kalta v'nigmura hamalacha. So now we could say that the work was actually completed, that element was also required. And I was thinking of that famous quote of Socrates, that because resting, when you're resting, it gives you a chance to examine what you've done, and how Socrates, the quote is, the unexamined life is not worth living. So just the idea of rest is something positive. Vayvarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i, and God blessed the seventh day, Vaykadesh oto, and he sanctified it. He made it unique. Ki vo shavat mikol melachto, for on it he ceased from all his work. Asher bara Elohim lasot, which God had created in making. And that syntax, which you can see right there's the lasot. Rashi will explain this complicated, difficult syntax and try to understand why it's put that way. So we have a few interesting things to take a look at. So remember how I've mentioned that the concept of bracha carries along with it the idea of plenitude, of not lacking anything. It's the opposite of lacking something. So let's take a look. So how does it say he blessed it and he sanctified it? And we want to know specifically. Those seem like generalities. So what exactly, in what way did God bless it and sanctify it? Barcho Baman, he blessed it with the manna. And again, that requires further elucidation, right? Shekol Yemei HaShavua, because all the days of the week, Yarad Lahem Omer LeGilgulet, there was it came down, the manna came down with the amount of 1 omer per head. So each person had exactly an omer to consume every single day. Uvashishi, but on the 6th day, lechem mishne, there was a double portion that fell on the 6th day. And that is the bracha. That's the plenitude. V'kidsho baman, and then he sanctified it also with the manna on the 7th day. Shelo yarad klal b'Shabbat, because the manna did not fall on the Shabbat. So the Shabbat was unique in that the manna did not fall on Shabbat at all. So totally different day, separating it from all the other 6 days when the manna fell. And just to finish up this Rashi, Vahamikra katav al ha'atid. And this verse is written with the future in mind, So I do want to mention also that there was, Rashi's pointing out the way in which the Shabbat was sanctified in being unique, in not being like the other days. Sorry, I didn't see whose hand was raised. Did somebody raise their hand? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to explain. Rashi made the point. However, I will tell you that on the 7th day, the manna, well, let's say this, on the other 6 days, if people saved more than an omer for the next day, there'd be worms in that manna. They were not supposed to save any of it. And then on the 6th day, when a double portion fell with that extra portion for the Shabbat, on the Shabbat, there were no worms. The manna was fresh, just as if they had picked it up that morning. So Asher bara Elohim la'asot, which Hashem had created to make. Okay, so here he says, Hamalacha the work Shahayta Ru'uya La'asot B'Shabbat, which was supposed to be done on the Shabbat, kafal. He doubled up the work on Friday, on the sixth day, Va'asta Bashishi, and he did it on the sixth day. Kamof Shemafurash B'Bereshit Rabbah, as is explained in the Bereshit Rabbah. And we'll go to Bereshit Rabbah and take a quick look at that, at what it states there. So when he says la'asot, in other words, what we're saying is we're translating this now, which
You're breaking up again.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Lauren, I'm going to recognize you.
I was just going to say that, even from the very start, there's been some moments, but we're getting most of it. But there are moments that we're not getting it because your connection's not strong.
Yeah, it's too bad. I mean, I could reboot entirely. That'll take a few moments. David?
Is that what did you reboot entirely before?
No, I did not. I only rebooted. Let me pause this.
Okay, reboot doesn't mean to close it down a program and open it back up. It means to turn off the computer.
I wasn't sure. Okay, let me stop the share. David, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So, I mean, just out of curiosity, from a logistics point of view, or just from a time frame point of view, did they have disease back then? Because the reason for my question is, you said the manna would have worms in it if you saved it, but then sometimes people don't feel good, right? And they want to, they don't want to eat what they have, and then they save it, because they want to eat it the next day, right? Let's say they just don't feel good, or they're whatever it is. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm just curious, or maybe that's way too detailed and it's not even worth it.
No, it's a good question. All right. So first of all, there was no illness until Jacob. And the reason we say that is because that is the first time illness is mentioned in the Torah. But that precedes the manna, so your question still holds water. But it is interesting that the story behind that is that the reason we say Gesundheit when people sneeze is that they believed that certainly within Jewish tradition, what would happen is there was no warning as to when a person was going to expire, and they would essentially expire with a sneeze. That was it. They'd live their lives, they'd never get sick, and they'd die. And with Jacob, it mentions how it says he got sick. And it was seen then as a way of preparing people and letting them know so that their death wouldn't come as an instant surprise. But it's interesting how universal, or relatively universal, I imagine, the idea of saying Gesundheit is, or you say in Hebrew, labriut, which means to health, so that sneeze should not represent your last breath. So going back to your question now, the manna was completely absorbed in their bodies. And it had the kind of taste where even if there was illness back then, I mean, we don't read about people getting sick back then, but even assuming they were, we have to, it's a story. That's why.
Oh, yeah.
We have to realize it's literature and it's a story, and it's not trying to say everything. And that's why we can ask questions that are, quote, scientific questions that quite possibly are based on scientific evidence that are contradictory to what's in the story. But it's a story. And it's that story about the manna has a lot to do with faithlessness, lack of trust in God, lack of appreciation, unwillingness to perform mitzvot, etc., etc. And it's this amazing illustration of human nature. So, am I still breaking up a lot?
No, you're perfect. Are very good, and thank you very much for the explanation. So that, I was just, sounds like I was going a little bit too deep on this. Like you said, it's a story. We have to accept certain things associated with it. So, no, thank you.
Yeah. So, but manna was like in the story, it's perfect food. It gets
Yeah.
totally absorbed into the body and nourishes you the whole way through. Right. Let's go back into the screen share. We have a few more minutes, so let's see what else we've got to do here. Right, let's go into the text here. Let's see if there's more. Oh, yes. Okay, we said we were just finishing up that idea of the God, which God had, the way Rashi intends, the way Rashi interprets the verse is which God intended to make. He completed everything that he intended to make. And I said that we would take a look at the Midrash Rabbah, and I'm going to have to go to Sefaria for that. So let me see what I can do to find that. Here we are. All right, I'm going to have a new share now and go to Sefaria. And you see here, this is the Midrash Rabbah. What's very lovely about Sefaria is you see how they have these things, and you can see how you can just click on it and it'll take you right to that source, right? Lauren?
Well, it's because mana in Hebrew is Haman, right? So I can't help but thinking about Purim,
Right.
and I'm wondering if there's a connection. I'm thinking I'm not the only one to consider this. So I Googled mana and Haman,
Yes.
and so it brings up a theological issue, which we don't have to totally get into right now, but I wanted to make the connection because of Purim.
Yes.
But if God creates everything, including anything that's giving us trouble,
Yes. Correct.
it can be seen as, and this is kind of along the line of what I was reading, but also along the line of what I was thinking, that God, as manna from heaven, gave us this beautiful gift that was the ultimate gift of pleasure and our life and sustenance. And on the other hand, there was the gift of Haman,
Mhm.
which, the reason I use the word gift is that if God places something there for a reason, and in general hardships, or if when we survive them, we're meant to survive them, we're meant to learn from them, and in that way, it can be seen. I don't want to get too, I mean, it's kind of, we're getting to a tough theological issue here dealing with evil and a gift from God, but I did want to make that connection because it is Purim, and I can't help but hear, thinking about Haman and Haman.
Of course. I know. It's a very clear similarity, right? Did you find anything that actually talked about a connection? Or are you making
Yes, but I don't know, and I'm just that it's a particular teacher. I don't know from what she's coming from. It's Sarah Yehudit Schneider, called A Still Small Voice, Teachings of Sarah Yehudit Schneider. And now I did not look, I just clicked on the first thing that came up with Google. There could be more, so I didn't do any further thing, but she was definitely going on the lines of the things that I was talking about, and her kind of introduction to this is talking about secrets of Purim.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. So I won't touch this further now. It's of course this problem of theodicy. In another class that I'm teaching, where we're really reading Midrash Rabbah on Noah, there's some stuff about that, because of course with the story of Noah, you're talking about divine punishment and stuff like that. So, okay, let's take a look at this, because we said that he was supposed to create something on the seventh day, right? So let's take a look. Here's the English. Rabbi Levi said in the name of Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, 3 creations created the Holy One, blessed be he, on each day. On the first, you're going to find this interesting and stuff we never really covered, right? Heaven, earth, and light, that we can gather. The second, the firmament, Gehenna, these are things that we did not discuss, and the angels. On the third, trees, herbs, and the Garden of Eden, right? So we know a little bit of each day, but some of it is tradition. On the 4th, the sun, the moon, and the constellations. That all is there. On the 5th, birds, fish, and the Leviathan. On the 6th, Adam, Eve, and the moving creatures. So here he says, he's saying 3 each day. But Rabbi Pinchas said on the 6th, he created 6 things: Adam, Eve, moving creatures, cattle, wild beasts, and, interesting, demons. Rabbi Benaiah said that, here's the verse he's citing that we have read in the just now, right? That God created and did and made is not written here, right? But that God created to make, la'asot, right? La'asot. Here's the Hebrew. Asher ba'ara Elohim, which God had created to make, to make. So because it doesn't say Asher bara Elohim, period, or va'asa, it says la'asot, in order to make. So all that the Holy One, blessed be He, would have created on the 7th, He did earlier and created it on the 6th. So this whole idea of Shabbat, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, of Shabbat being a double day, that having, right, we talk about having an extra soul on the Shabbat. All these themes sort of combine into this idea of the Shabbat being unique in that its value is double. And by the way, the offerings that were brought on Shabbat were double the daily offering. So this idea of doubling is really heavy into Shabbat. So let me stop that share. Sorry. And we still have a little bit more time. All right, let me go back in. I'm sorry. See if I can find it. Here we are. So let's go into, all right. And the next verse. Ele toldot hashamayim va'aretz. These are the generations of the heaven and the earth, behi baram, when they were created. Now look at that. In the Torah, this hey is written in the small kind of way. And that's going to lend itself to interpretation. The verse doesn't end there. It goes on with beyom. Let's see what I can do here. Beyom asot Hashem Elohim, on the day that the Adonai Elohim, notice how it's different now. It's not just Elohim, it's Hashem Elohim, the Lord God, Eretz v'Shamayim, made earth. And now it says earth and heaven. Notice these distinctions, and that this happens after the Etnachta, the middle of the verse here. And here's the story. The chapter 1 actually ends in the middle of a verse, because this is the end of the first chapter, really, right? It's reflecting back quickly and saying, this is the story. This is what happened when they were created. And now it goes on to the second creation story. And notice that here it's Shamayim va'aretz, heaven and earth. And in this part of the verse, it's Eretz v'Shamayim. Earth comes first and heaven comes second. And in a way, the Torah is very subtly letting us know that the first chapter is about looking at the creation from a universal point of view, and quite literally, from the universe point of view. And the second chapter is going to be about the goings on earth. And so the emphasis on the first chapter is on the heavens, and the emphasis on the second chapter is going to be on the earth. But it's so interesting that chapter 1 actually ends in the middle of a Hebrew verse, and in chapter 2. So let's go a little bit more. Let's see. Yes. Okay, so this is a fairly lengthy Rashi, so we'll stop here and continue next week, God willing, with this. So, thank you. I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording